I wake up, flex, thumb down that check. No drip this, tell him run it up. No sleep, no rest. Might crash, might wreck, but first I stretch. Tell him run it up. I wake up, flex, thumb down that check. No drip this, tell him run it up.
What up, fam? Welcome to the Grit and Grind Show. I'm your host, Carlos, and we've got an awesome show lined up for you. On this episode, we'll be discussing the contract of Miami Heat coach Erik Spoelstra, Master P's new business venture, and how NFL player Russell Okung doubled his salary by getting paid in Bitcoin. Lastly, we'll wrap it up with an interview.
Shout out to our sponsors at Outfield. Outfield is a performance-based CRM company for winning sales teams. At Outfield, they know that sales is a sport. So they provide the one tool you need to stay on top of your game, a gamified CRM that optimizes your productivity and maximizes your performance. If you're looking to add a competitive boost for your team, visit outfieldapp.com and use the promo code CLOSERS for 10% off.
Talk about starting at the bottom, now I'm here. The coach of the Miami Heat has had a unique journey in the NBA. In 1995, Coach Spo started off as a video coordinator for the Heat, and since then has worked his way up the ranks, serving as director of scouting, then assistant coach. And after Pat Riley stepped down in 2008, Erik was tapped as the new head coach of the Miami Heat. Coach Spo is currently the second longest tenured NBA coach in the league and has won 3 NBA championships. But the most interesting part about Coach Spo is his contract, which is laced with incentives. Earlier last year, it was reported that the Miami Heat higher-ups rewarded Erik Spoelstra with an extra $120,000 after each victory, whether it be regular season or playoffs. The $120,000 per win is on top of his $3 million base salary that he's set to earn. This puts Coach Spo's 2020 total earnings well above $9 million. Rap mogul Master P has had his hand in an array of business ventures, from clothing to film and food. Yes, food. He most recently relaunched Rap Snacks, a potato chip brand featuring the faces of musical artists from Cardi B to his son Romeo. P also announced he has launched Uncle P's Southern Style Fish Fry. But recently, Master P announced he's getting into the car business. The rapper and entrepreneur is known for his business savviness and now has his eyes on creating the first Black-owned supercar. P announced he is teaming up with Richard Patterson, an ex-Tesla engineer, to bring the vision to life. Patterson is a former engineer at Tesla, designing the Model S from scratch. He also designed the landing gear on the Boeing 777 and the folding seat system in the Dodge minivan. Mr. Patterson has gone to create his own supercar, the Nemesis RR, adding diversity to the automotive industry and empowering a culture of dreamers. Talk about doing it for the culture. I'm excited to see this car in person. Crypto has made an explosive run that started in December 2020. The Carolina Panthers offensive tackle Russell Okung is receiving half of his $13 million salary in Bitcoin. The arrangement involves Okung using a startup that converts payroll direct deposits into cryptocurrency, and it comes as Bitcoin has shattered record new prices. Okung used Twitter to declare that he's being paid in Bitcoin, framing the development as a fulfillment from a 2019 wish. Like many other Bitcoin boosters, Okung claimed that the cryptocurrency is superior to traditional currencies because government can't deflate its value.
Chipmunk cookies are made with high-quality ingredients for customers to enjoy without risking the negative side effects of having too many carbs or sugars. Chipmunk Baking is providing amazing dessert alternatives for anyone that has diabetes, celiac disease, or on a keto diet. Make sure to check out Chipmunk at chipmunkbaking.com and use the promo code CLOSERS for 10% off. Our guest today is Mike Tuaililli Brown, a former NFL player that went from tackling to tech. Mike is a former 2-time All-American football star from Duke University and went on to play linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts. Mike is now the founder and CEO of Win-Win, a gamified giving platform that is transforming philanthropic funding. Mike is passionate about tech, philanthropy, and has built an amazing platform that gives back to communities. Mike has a wealth of experience in the sports and business world, working with many partners, elite brands, and athletes. We're excited to have him join us today. Next up, our interview with Mike. Hey, Mike, welcome to Closers. I'm excited to have you on. How you been?
Man, first of all, thanks, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here, man. I'm excited to be talking with you today and having this conversation on closers. I've been good, man. I've been good. I'm just coming off of a what I call a CEO think trip. And so I'm feeling refreshed, feeling
problems. So really cool to hear how you're doing that. But kind of kicking things off, we've chatted and connected over probably like the last 18 months, man. It's just inspiring to see your story. So you've had success both on and off the football field. Share your tackling the tech story and kind of how all of that has brought you to today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Tackling the tech is something that's grown, kind of my saying there, but it's true. I think it encapsulates all of what I've done, in this transition. So just to start you off, I'm from Houston, Texas, born and raised in A-Leaf, better known as the SWAT. And, coming up in that environment, I had a great childhood, brought up by a single mother. And one of the things was she allowed me to explore my athletic, endeavors. And so I played everything, but grew a love for sports and particularly football. But at the same time, my mom also had, the same level of diligence in the academic realm. So, for me, it was always academics over athletics. And so one of the things, although, I was doing very good in high school, on the field, I was also 4.0, president of the engineering club, National Honor Society, all those things. And that actually is what led to a decision to go on to Duke University, where I earned a full scholarship to play football, middle linebacker. But again, I always got to remind people, I just so happen to know how to tackle people and do it pretty well. So while at Duke, I followed that theme, right? Because I wanted to be able to play in a top division, right? The ACC, while also being academically challenged. And, no shade or cap to any other university, but I felt like Duke, being at that time top 5 undergrad degree was a great choice for me. So went there and was consistent, in that kind of dual life, if you will, right? I was a 2-time All-American, led the country in tackles. But then I was also more proud of the fact that I graduated early with a public policy degree and was on the law school track and had actually taken the LSAT and, understood kind of how fickle sports can be, right? 1 or 2 injuries and then you can never touch the field again. So I was preparing myself in that regard. But, I had the opportunity to go tackle more people, this time for a little bit of money. And so I went on and did that. I signed with the Indianapolis Colts as a middle linebacker and, had a phenomenal time, playing in the league and, learning from a lot of the veterans, because I was just as thirsty for knowledge off the field as I was for, banging heads on the field. And so I was learning a lot about what, players were doing with their money and business ideas, all these cool things that we were having kind of locker room conversations. And so, after a few years of playing, I started to make this transition that is now known as tackling the tech. And really it started with just an interest for business, right? Sure. Not even any particular type. I feel like I want to get into business because mind you, I was on that law school track, interested in policy and can't imagine what life would have been if I would have continued down that route. And so when I finished playing, I was actually took the GMAT and I was going to go to Rice actually to get my MBA because I figured I'll go to Rice, get an MBA, and then I'll figure out this business thing from there. Thankfully, in my opinion, a good friend of mine had introduced me to a program called Draper University out in Silicon Valley. And I can tell you, I didn't know anything about it. I had never even heard the word Silicon Valley before at that point. And this was 2013. But it sounded interesting, right? And so I ended up taking a leap of faith and applied after the deadline. And in fact, Tim Draper emailed me himself and said, hey, or called me actually and said, hey, you're in full scholarship. We'll see you in March. And so, I went out there not knowing anything. And it was basically a program for aspiring tech entrepreneurs. It was 9 weeks during the summer or kind of the late spring. And I went through it and it was literally like drinking from a fire hydrant, just learning all this crazy stuff around innovation, product market fit and raising venture capital. But I'm happy to say that I actually finished number 1 in the program out of about 55 students. And so I was excited because again, I approached the classroom or these types of situations the same way I do, the field. And so I went in all in learning, and just giving my best effort. And that was like what really turned the page for me in terms of, okay, this is what I want to get into, right? I started learning about innovation. I started meeting founders who had created these companies, these apps, these things that I was actually consumers of, right? And didn't understand the economics behind it, didn't understand that this guy who's 3 years younger than me, right, created this, right, and sold it to Google for 500 million. Yet I've been out here banging my head on people for money. And I was like, all right, let's get right. And so from that point on, I spent the next, probably 10, 11 months teaching myself how to code several programming languages. I learned the entire Adobe Creative Suite to just understand Photoshop and design and how to create, and as well as video editing. And really for me, it was about preparation, right? The way I approach things is if I'm going to commit myself and my time to anything, I want to be the best at it, right? That's just how I was brought up and how I'm built. And so that was, very similar, right? It's like, if I want to play in the league, I need to be working on my 40, I need to be working on tackling, I need to be working on bench press, I need to be working on all these different things. And so it's very similar. And so as I made the transition, right, I basically picked up my young family, my wife and a baby, and one on the way, and relocated to Silicon Valley, because at the time, I felt like Houston didn't have the infrastructure or resources, for somebody wanting to get into tech in particular, right? And so I went out to the Bay Area, and that kind of was solidifying that tackling the tech transition, because I first worked at a startup. I said, I got 9 weeks of a program, some lines of code. Let me go work at a startup that's kind of booming right now and just learn how this thing works from the inside out. So I was fortunate to be able to work at a great startup at that time, and spent about 15 months there and had about 3 promotions. I came in entry level, and within 5-6 months, I was now leading the growth team. And so I love just that model of production and just getting things done and figuring things out that are seemingly unknown at the time. And then that's when the idea for Win-Win first hit me. So I moved out to the Bay without an idea at all. I just knew that I wanted to get into the ecosystem, and I figured just being around folks that are thinking in this way would lead to me, coming up with something. And I'm grateful for what I came up with, because it's quite literally at the intersection of my 3 passions, which is sports, tech, and philanthropy.
That's awesome. I mean, just how you approach problems, how you approach, your philosophy to life, and really spearheading anything that you set your mind to, giving it your all, and making sure that, you're at the top no matter what. That's a huge inspiration. I mean, I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, having those principles and those values that your mom instilled to you at an early age really set the foundation for what is your mentality and your mindset today, and really what's inspired you to continue to push through as you face adversity. So really, really cool to hear your story and just, all the things you've accomplished thus far. Kind of moving into, absolutely. Kind of moving into next, share more about Win-Win, the vision that you had and what you set out to accomplish.
Yeah, so it kind of picks up right from where I just left off, because I was working at this startup, and it was in the advertising tech, industry. So we were serving up, ads within mobile games, actually, but in a very unique and incentivized way. But the point is, there was a lot of guys that were really into fantasy sports, right, at the time, and I remember they were like organizing the league and doing different things, right? And in parallel, I remember just noticing all the daily fantasy sports commercials, right? Namely FanDuel, DraftKings at this time. And mind you, this was, late 2015. And so this is what, at a time where I believe the statistic was, if you're watching a sports matchup, every 45 seconds, during a commercial break, you're going to see one of those 2 companies. And the thing that stood out to me was like, wow, that's a lot of promotion. But I don't see any of my friends who are currently in the league promoting it, themselves on social, right? Like I didn't see any of my friends like, hey, pick me up on your lineup tonight or whatever. And so I remember just being curious about that, right? And that was one of the things that I learned in the Bay in that program was like, being that curiosity is actually, really key, because you're asking questions and you're kind of digging down into like what the root of an issue is. And then, people come up with solutions to these problems. And so as I was going through that process, I learned from a lot of the players that, I basically said, how do you feel about, this daily fantasy game? And overwhelmingly, it was like, I don't care. I couldn't care less, right? Because it came down to the fact that these companies were making billions of dollars, right? And the athletes weren't getting any of that, right? Outside of a couple select players at the time who were getting little endorsement deals, right? And so I was like, wow, that's interesting, right? There has to be a better way to create value for the players, right, who drive this entire industry through their performances, create more value for them, right? And so one of the things that was a unique insight that I had, because I am a former player, right, is that the thing that's important to athletes outside of money and the contracts, right, is impact, right? Largely, I would say the majority of athletes, care about how they can use their platform for good, right, in the most efficient way, right? Obviously, you see bigger examples where guys are going really, hard on their philanthropic endeavors and their foundations and the things they do. And you have other players that do things in more subtle ways, right? And so I was like, but one thing I know is consistent is that if we can do something that could inspire a kid, right, or help a family, right, in a way that doesn't take away from our time and what we're focused on in our careers, then we would do it, right? In fact, we actually have to do it a lot of times as players in the league where we're showing up to different events and hospitals. And while we enjoy that, right, I was thinking about how can we tap into that for each player while leveraging this fantasy sports and this gaming world. And that's when it hit me like a bag of bricks, where I was like, what if, the money, right? Because in parallel, what I was learning from the guys at the company that were trying to get me to join their fantasy league was, while they may lose money, right, it's not really about the money. It's about, the bragging rights. It's about the camaraderie, and we have a draft with some beers and all that stuff. So I'm like, wow, I actually thought I didn't play fantasy, right? Because I always told them, I said, dude, I don't play fantasy. I play reality. So, I'm not as interested. But then that's when they started to break down the real motivations. And so I said, well, what if the money that you're losing, right? Because I learned at the time, 98% of the money that's won in these platforms goes to less than 1% of the user base, right? Wow. These sharks, a lot of times, which are manipulating the game, but that's another conversation. So what I realized was, what if the money that you're basically losing could go to something more impactful that, let's say, the athlete themselves cares about, and instead of winning money back, you're winning actual experiences that money can't buy, or connecting with the player, or an autographed helmet, or whatever it is. And overwhelmingly, a lot of the folks I was talking to was like, man, I would do that in a heartbeat, right? Because they're still getting the bragging rights, the camaraderie. But now, instead of bragging about the $300 you won from the pot of friends, now you're bragging about the Cowboys, helmet that's signed by the entire team that's sitting on your desk that they have to pass by every day, right? And so that was the moment where win-win was born in my mind, and I got to work. This was late 2015, and I just started diving deep into market research and interviews of different potential users, athletes, right? And so that's where I started it off, and I started the company in early 2016 officially, and we got running. I was able to build our initial team. We raised $1 million right out the gate from top investors, including my alma mater, Duke University. I was proud that they came in and invested from the innovation fund, which was a big deal for us. We had some athletes, after talking with certain players, about being potential partners in running campaigns and doing different things. They actually became investors in the company because they believed that this was something that was needed, and it still is. So that was the birth of Win-Win. And to kind of summarize, essentially what we created out the gate was a platform where we work with a bunch of different professional athletes, namely the NFL, NBA, MLB, and they would host their own tournament, right? So now you think of a player like a Malcolm Jenkins or a Cam Newton saying, hey, on social media directly to the fan base, I'm hosting a tournament, right? At the time, it was fantasy. And you would come in and you'd be able to build a lineup, and then money that you're paying is actually a donation that would support that player's foundation and or some local cause that they care about. And then what you're competing for in the actual tournament is not money, but instead experiences that money can't buy. So like first place, we put 3 people on a private jet that flew down with Patrick Peterson to the LSU versus Alabama game and watched the game with him from the sidelines, right? And so that was an amazing prize. And I can tell you right now, the average, amount that each of those guys donated was about $40. But they had the best, outcome in the tournament. And so they were able to go as their prize. And so we've done a bunch of different things, from sideline passes to FaceTime calls to autographed jerseys and merchandise, all while raising money for, each of the players, charitable entity or organization. And, in true kind of startup fashion, right, over the last 5 years, we've been iterating the model, right, in terms of fantasy sports, right? And we went through a bunch of different iterations just based on our user feedback, the data. But at the end of the day, it's all what we call gamified giving. And so, it's no longer fantasy sports format. It's more pick'ems, right? Where you're just predicting the outcomes of upcoming games, right? Which we found to be a lot easier for our target demographic, right? Because building a fantasy lineup is actually quite hard, right?
Definitely.
To the point where you got people, creating scripts and algorithms to game the system in order to win. And so the pick'em was much more, attractive and appealing to our target demographic. The folks who, care about, meeting, they see value in meeting the player, and they also don't mind giving to their charity, right? They're not the ones doing the fantasy sports at a high level. And so we've since iterated a few different ways, which I can touch on. But at the end of the day, it's gamified giving. And the vision that I had at that time was really about and it was really more specific to athletes, right? Because again, that's my background. That's the perspective that I had. But as we started to see this thing work, right now it was like, how can we help any entity of influence, as I call it, right? Whether it's a singer, an athlete, a company, a brand, right? Who has an influence over an audience, right? Whether it's to purchase something, to click on something or whatever, how can we enable them to activate their audience in a charitable, philanthropic way that feels really natural and feels really fun to the actual audience, right? Because you have a lot of things like raffles or auctions, which in my humble opinion are quite outdated and antiquated, particularly from the lens of a millennial or Gen Z, right? And so by leveraging gaming, right, pulling the best elements of gaming, combining with the best elements of giving, right, now you have something really special where you have people contributing to a cause in a way that doesn't even feel like they're contributing to the cause. And I point to folks like Tom's and their model of buy one, give one, who kind of helped establish this natural sense of giving where I want shoes, I'm going to buy shoes, and then, simultaneously I'm also impacting somebody else in a positive way. So, that was kind of the entrepreneurial venture in terms of me going and starting the company, the vision that I had, how that's evolved a bit. And I'm excited. I have all the good things to say there, but, I also want to be clear to the closers community here that, when you're building something that has not existed in the world before, it's actually quite hard, right? It's very difficult. There's no playbook, there's no roadmap, right? There's no Googling what's the business model for my company, right? Like you have to make the best decisions that you can. And so with that comes, quite a bit of ups and downs and what they call the entrepreneurial journey, right? And having to really overcome a lot of adversity. And for me, thankfully, I felt while it was all very new to me, what wasn't new to me was, having to persevere and overcome, adversity and, fight through different things and figure out things with very little information. So it's been a great journey with the level of aggression that I did when I was meeting fullbacks in the A-gap. So, for me, I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to continuing to develop my network here within the entrepreneurial community and helping those that I can and being helped by those that may be a little further down the road.
Love it, man. It's got the LeBron going back to Cleveland kind of feel. So, I'm a fan. As I said, man, we've gotten to know each other over the last, call it 2 years now. And, just really appreciate you jumping on Closers, being with us today. Again, your story is inspiring. What you're doing is amazing. And Mike, I just really want to thank you for your time today.
Man, thank you so much, Carlos. This is a pleasure. Happy to do it. Happy to jump back on, man. And shout out to all the closers out there in the closer community.
Hey, man, I really appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for your time today, and be well.
Same to you, bro.
No drip, just tell 'em run it over.